Teacher. If you think you know what evil looks like, think again. Like, share, and subscribe. Because tonight's story will make you question everyone you've ever trusted. The night it began, the rain wouldn't stop. Sheets of water hammered against the small town of Redwood, turning its streets into dark rivers. At 10:42 p.m., Officer Derek Miller responded to a 911 call from a quiet suburban home. A burst pipe in the basement, or so the caller said. But when he arrived at 47 Elmwood Lane, the air felt wrong. The front door was ajar, the lights flickering, and a faint smell, something metallic, drifted up from below. Daniel Reese greeted him with a smile. "Sorry, officer. I didn't mean to bother you this late," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked like any ordinary middle-aged teacher, polite, calm, composed. The kind of man neighbors waved to in the mornings. But when Miller stepped inside, the sound of dripping water grew louder, echoing like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. "Flooding's bad down there," Daniel added. "I think the old pipes finally gave up." When the officer descended into the basement, his flashlight beam caught on something strange. The water was barely ankle deep, yet the floorboards beneath it seemed uneven, bulging slightly. Miller crouched down, pressing on one with his boot. It gave a hollow thud. He looked back up at Daniel. "You sure this is just a flood?" The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "I'm sure," he said softly. The next morning, a repair crew arrived to drain the water. By noon, one of the workers shouted from below. They'd found something wedged between the floor joists, a box sealed tight with black tape. Inside were dozens of old photos, names scribbled on the back, and folded sheets of handwritten notes labeled subjects. One name stood out among them: Lena Moore, a student who had gone missing 8 years earlier. Detective Sarah Keene was assigned to the case. She'd been with Redwood PD for 12 years and knew Daniel by reputation. The adored history teacher, the man who organized charity drives, who students called Mr. Reese the Wise. But something about the box made her uneasy. The handwriting on the notes was meticulous, almost obsessive. Each page detailed behaviors, patterns, and emotional triggers for different people, as if someone had been studying them. When Sarah interviewed Daniel at the station, he remained calm, his hands folded neatly on the table. "You think I hurt that girl?" he asked. "Officer, I help kids. I don't harm them." His tone was so measured it was hard to read. "Then why did we find her name under your house?" Sarah pressed. Daniel looked her in the eye, his smile unwavering. "Because," he said, "you're looking in the wrong place." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She pulled Lena's missing person file from archives. Last seen after detention, no forced entry at the school, no sign of struggle. Just gone. Then she found something chilling. Daniel had been the teacher who signed her detention slip that day. She stared at his signature, identical to the one on the box notes. The next morning, Sarah returned to 47 Elmwood with a warrant. The house was eerily quiet. Daniel wasn't there. His car sat in the driveway, engine cold. When the team moved inside, everything was spotless, except for one thing. In the basement, beneath the freshly replaced boards, they found a small key taped under a beam. It was marked Room 312. Sarah's stomach twisted. That was Daniel's old classroom, closed off years ago after a fire. She and her team drove to Redwood High immediately. The janitor opened the rusted door with trembling hands. Dust filled the air. Inside, the walls were covered in yellowed newspaper clippings and photographs of students, all neatly pinned in rows. But what froze everyone was the writing across the chalkboard in thick white chalk. "The lesson never ends." And below it, the keyhole to a hidden cabinet. When they pried it open, something fell out, a small audio recorder, still running. Sarah pressed play. A calm voice filled the room. "Detective Keene," Daniel said. "You found the first chapter, but I've been writing the ending for years." And continues. The audio message ended with a faint click, followed by silence that seemed to swallow the room whole. The detective stood frozen under the flickering fluorescent lights of room 312. Sarah Keene's hand trembled as she rewound the tape, but no matter how many times she played it, the calm, deliberate tone of Daniel Reese's voice didn't change. You found the first chapter, he'd said, but I've been writing the ending for years. By the time the sun rose over Redwood, the school had become a full-blown crime scene. Forensics combed every inch of the classroom, photographing the walls of pinned newspaper clippings. Each article was about missing people, students, teachers, even a janitor from a neighboring district. Every single one had one thing in common. Daniel had worked at or near each school during the disappearances. What no one could figure out was why. Sarah stared at the collection of articles, her mind racing. It wasn't random. It was organized like a timeline, with names written neatly beneath each photo. He wasn't just killing, she thought. He was documenting. There was a pattern, but what was a connection? Then her eyes stopped at the last photo in the bottom corner. Her own picture, clipped from the local newspaper after a charity event. Beneath it, in the same careful handwriting, final subject. Her stomach dropped. For the first time, Sarah felt the icy edge of real fear. That afternoon, the FBI joined the investigation. Agent Marcus Reed, a profiler with a calm but unnerving presence, reviewed Daniel's journals with her. This isn't a crime of passion, Marcus said. It's a behavioral study. He's teaching himself something, learning control step by step. He flipped through a page filled with sketches of faces, labeled trust, panic, compliance. He's not driven by impulse, Marcus continued. He's experimenting with obedience. Hours later, they traced the origin of the audio recorder. It was purchased online 2 weeks ago, but the shipping address was a warehouse outside of town, registered under Daniel's name. A SWAT team was dispatched immediately. When they entered, they found an old desk, a small camera pointed at a chair, and another message taped to the lens. You're late for class. The desk drawers were filled with lesson plans, all written in Daniel's handwriting. Titles like Psychological Boundaries, Breaking Resistance, and Perfect Obedience. But the most disturbing part was the attendance sheet, with names of students from his classes over the last 15 years, and beside each one, a date. Many were marked as completed. Completed? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded grimly. He's marking them like assignments. Meanwhile, a team searched Daniel's computer, recovered from his home office. On it, they found hundreds of emails sent to himself, detailing every step of his interactions with students, colleagues, even neighbors. The entries read like cold case reports, analyzing responses, emotions, how people reacted when challenged, praised, or ignored. Then came the most chilling discovery. A recent file dated only 2 days before the basement was flooded. The title, The Final Lesson Execution Plan. Inside was a detailed outline of an experiment involving controlled environment, 3 participants, and an ending labeled detachment. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled to the end. The participants' names were listed: Lena Moore, Daniel Reese, and Sarah Keene. He's including himself, Marcus said, frowning. It's a psychological loop. He's planning something that ends with him. Maybe suicide, maybe disappearance. But you're part of it. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered, and Daniel's calm, familiar voice came through. Detective Keene, he said softly, almost kindly. You're a quick learner. But lessons aren't meant to be studied from afar. You'll have to see it for yourself. Daniel, where are you? Sarah demanded, signaling her team. You already know, he replied. You just haven't admitted it yet. The basement wasn't the beginning. It was a test. The line went dead. Minutes later, analysts traced the call. It had come from a deactivated school district phone line, one that hadn't been used since the fire at Redwood High 10 years ago. The signal location? The ruins of the old school annex, 2 miles away from where Daniel once taught. Sarah and Marcus arrived within the hour. The annex was barely standing, collapsed walls, twisted metal, broken glass glinting in the moonlight. The air smelled of wet ash and decay. Inside, flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating fragments of desks and old textbooks scattered across the floor. Then Marcus stopped suddenly. Sarah, he said, pointing ahead. In the center of the room stood a single desk, spotless, untouched by time. On it lay a fresh red apple and a note. Lesson 2, Control the Fear. The apple was hollow. Inside was a flash drive. They plugged it into a portable device, and a video began to play. It was Daniel, sitting in a chair, hands folded neatly. Behind him, a wall filled with maps, red string, and newspaper clippings. "Every teacher needs a willing student," he said, smiling faintly. "You think you're hunting me, Sarah, but I've been teaching you from the start. You just haven't realized what kind of student you are." The screen went black. Then one final message appeared, typed in white. "End of lesson 2. Next class begins tomorrow." Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the dark screen, and behind her, a faint creak echoed to the abandoned hall, like footsteps. The final lesson. The air inside the old annex was colder than it should have been. Dust hung thick like fog, and the faint echo of those footsteps refused to fade. Detective Sarah Keene spun around, gun raised, her flashlight slicing through the darkness. But the hall was empty. The only thing moving was a loose curtain swaying from a cracked window. Agent Marcus Reed approached cautiously, whispering, "He's been here. Recently." Sarah nodded, her pulse hammering. She could feel it. Daniel was close. Too close. By dawn, the building had been sealed off. Forensics moved in, scanning every inch of the annex. Hidden beneath the teacher's desk, they discovered a hidden latch leading down to a narrow staircase. It wasn't on any building plans. The air grew heavier as Sarah descended, her boots echoing softly against the concrete steps. The flashlight beam revealed walls lined with old photos, laminated lesson plans, and sticky notes scrawled in Daniel's tidy handwriting. "Obedience begins with comfort. To control others, control fear. The perfect student doesn't realize they're learning." At the bottom of the stairs stood a single steel door. Scratches covered the handle, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. Sarah exchanged a glance with Marcus, then pushed it open. The room inside was lit by a single swinging bulb. There was no blood, no signs of violence, only order. 3 chairs sat in a circle, each labeled Lena Moore, Daniel Reese, Sarah Keene. In the center, a small video camera blinked red. Recording. Sarah pressed play on the nearby screen. The footage showed Daniel sitting in one of those very chairs, hours earlier. "Every teacher learns from their students," he said, his voice calm, eyes fixed on the lens. "But every lesson has a conclusion. Tonight, I'll complete mine." He stood, turned the camera slightly, and pointed it toward a second figure, a young woman tied to a chair. The face was pale, trembling but unmistakable. Lena Moore, the girl who'd vanished 8 years ago. Marcus exhaled sharply. "He didn't kill her," he murmured. "He's been keeping her." Sarah's throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. But before she could finish, the video continued. Daniel's voice grew softer, almost kind. "You were my first failure. Lena, you resisted. You fought. But every good lesson deserves review." He crouched down beside her, his expression unreadable. "This time, I'll have help." He looked directly into the camera and smiled. "Detective Keene, the door's open. Come finish the class." The screen flickered, then cut to black. Suddenly, from the far side of the room, came a faint tapping. Marcus moved toward the sound, shining his flashlight against the wall. Behind a metal panel, there was movement, slow, weak but human. They pried it open, revealing a small chamber barely big enough to fit a person. Inside, curled up, eyes wide in terror, was Lena. She was alive. Barely. As medics rushed in, Sarah knelt beside her. "You're safe," she whispered. But Lena's trembling hand reached up, gripping Sarah's sleeve. "No," she croaked. "You don't understand. He said this wasn't the end. He said the final lesson was you." Before Sarah could respond, her radio crackled. "Detective, we've got a situation. Reese's car just pulled up outside your house." The blood drained from her face. She bolted for the exit, Marcus close behind. The drive back felt endless, sirens cutting to the morning fog. When they arrived, the front door of Sarah's home was wide open. Inside, everything was untouched, except her living room wall, written across it in chalk, the same handwriting as before. "The teacher becomes a student." A laptop sat on her table, Playing another video. Daniel again, calm, composed, standing in that very room. You chased me through fear, Sarah, he said. But fear is just a first step. The real test is control. He smiled faintly, eyes cold. You passed. Marcus frowned. Passed what? Then came the sound, a soft chime. Every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. A link appeared on their screens. Final lesson live. Sarah opened it. The live stream showed Daniel sitting inside a parked car at an unknown location. Behind him, through the window, they could see flashing red and blue lights in the distance. Multiple police cruisers. He was already surrounded. The end of every story, Daniel said to the camera, isn't justice. It's understanding. He paused, looking down, his voice lowering. You wanted control, detective. I gave it to you. You found her. You stopped me. But now, what will you do with the part of me you understand? The screen glitched. The camera shook violently, lights flashing, shouting voices. Then static. Sarah and Marcus stood in silence, waiting for dispatch. Moments later, the radio crackled again. Units on scene report. The suspect's vehicle is empty. No sign of Daniel Reese. Days turned into weeks. The case dominated headlines. The teacher who vanished before capture. Lena was recovering under protective care, recounting fragments of her captivity. But Daniel's whereabouts remained a mystery. His journals, recovered from a burned-out cabin days later, ended with a single sentence. The lesson continues. Months later, Detective Keene returned to work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. One night, she opened her mailbox and froze. Inside was a small envelope. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper, a new attendance sheet. Her name was at the top. Next to it, in Daniel's perfect handwriting, a single word. Incomplete. If you think this story was intense, the narrator's voice would echo, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe before class starts again.